The Canada-India dispute over the murder of a Sikh separatist leader has created high tensions that can threaten the relationship between both countries. Imposing restrictions on trade can help ensure sovereignty and diplomats are being protected, thus ensuring the de-escalation of the Canada-India dispute. In June 2023, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a pro-Palestinian activist, was murdered in British Columbia. By September 2023, Prime Minister Trudeau addressed Canadian Parliament, making an accusation that India may have been involved in the murder. This caused a catalyst of international disputes to follow. India stopped visa applications for Canadian citizens, and Canadian diplomats left India following Prime Minister Trudeau's allegation. This leads us to the possibilities that could form in order to aid in the de-escalation process. As international law evolves, so does the conception of sovereignty, as stated in Martyr's Lecture 1. Sovereignty is the idea that a state has the authority to govern themselves. International law is an important part to the structure of international society. Michael Byers writes that states, through their governments, think of themselves as sovereign. The idea of sovereignty is extremely important when looking at the Canada-India dispute. If the claims are true, and India came onto Canadian territory and killed a Canadian citizen, issues of sovereignty come into play. The international order has been created to protect the freedom and enhancements of individual states, and having other states impose themselves onto another state threatens the idea of sovereignty as stated in Kazemi, page 23. On page 93, Kazemi mentions that each state has the right to choose its value system and to pursue its own ideas of the good to the extent that no harm is caused to other states. Having countries' sovereignties threatened can lead to trade restrictions, immigration relationships, and diplomatic relations. This reinforces that idea that Canada, as a powerhouse country, can restrict the flow of goods in order to protect its sovereignty and its citizens within its borders. The protection of Canadian citizens is extremely important in dealing with issues surrounding sovereignty. Canada emphasizes freedom of religion, and having a Sikh leader murdered outside of his place of worship can threaten the safety of Canadians. There are various participants of international law that help promote a country's interests within international relations. A significant contributor to this is the use of diplomats and their contribution to treaty negotiations as stated in Martyr Lecture 5. Diplomats are government officials that represent their country's interests and promote their policies within international society. Diplomats and diplomatic relations are important to the upholding of human rights and the promotion of this idea within the international community. Substantial promotions of the subjects of law of nations have been devoted to the immunities of states and their diplomatic representatives, as stated in Lockerpatch, page 114. Lockerpatch mentions that international cooperation has provided interesting instances of giving up some of the sovereign membership within states to promote diplomatic relations. Since the Canada-India dispute has occurred, Canada has removed 41 diplomats from India after they threatened to revoke diplomatic immunity for Canadian diplomats. This then caused Canada to accuse India of not following the principle of priority provided by the Vienna Convention. Removing diplomats is imperative to protect their safety within India, but this then can cause halts into the progression of de-escalation. A foreign policy newspaper mentions that Canada's diplomatic reductions weakens Canada's approach to people ties and that there is a little incentive to de-escalate the situation on India's part. There is no doubt that diplomats are fundamental to protecting a state's interest, and having a reduction in diplomatic presence can drastically impact diplomatic relations and the de-escalation process. Trade is very important to the building of a country's economy and the partnerships they create. Countries that allow for international trade grow faster, innovate more, improve productivity, and provide higher income that allows more opportunities to individuals. Canada and India have a long-withstanding trade commitment to each other that in turn helps India build its economy and limit poverty within the country. On page 32, Chimney mentions that India has a large and populous state that has high growth rates and has succeeded in the reduction of poverty within liberal economic order. This growth can be based on trade involvement with international states. International treaties have occupied a special place in global economic affairs within trade matters, as stated by Brumner. Treaties memorialize agreements between countries and often need approval from both countries' national legislature, as stated by Brummer. They are able to express commitments more effectively than customary law, but they are filled with legitimacy and implied consent is given by those governed. This is found on page 624 of Brummer's article. Having large trade partners like Canada and the accusation of the murder of a Sikh leader will cause a halt to trade negotiations, thus negatively impacting India and its people. The progress India has and is making could easily fall back into old patterns without allowing for the de-escalation of the ongoing dispute. As mentioned earlier, India has done little to help the de-escalation process, and this is a situation that can very easily impact their economy. In order to effectively prepare Canada for the de-escalation practices, the imposition of trade restrictions can potentially worsen the dispute, but the threat of having them in place could also help India want to repair the relationship in order to avoid issues within their economy. Since India is a member of the World Trade Organization and can be defined as a developing country, it is imperative that the relationship with Canada is repaired in order to help their trade practices, and this is found in Spilo et al. In conclusion, it is imperative that the Canada-India dispute de-escalates, as it can cause restrictions on trade in order to satisfy the protection of sovereignty and the diplomats within the countries.